The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Forward Operating Base Kandahar, but Chief Warrant Officer Raven Blackbird Nakamura barely noticed. Her calloused hands moved with practiced precision along the Apache's armored hull, checking each bolt, each panel, each vulnerable seam that could mean the difference between coming home and becoming another casualty statistic. The AH-64D Apache longbow stood like a predatory insect against the Afghan sky, its Hellfire missiles gleaming dully in the early light. What happened next would challenge everything the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment thought they knew about their most decorated and most enigmatic pilot. Raven pulled off her flight gloves to better feel for stress fractures along the helicopter's main rotor housing. The metal was still cool from the desert night, but she knew that within hours it would be scorching under the merciless sun and the heat of combat. As she stretched to reach a particularly stubborn inspection point, her olive-drab flight suit rode up slightly on her left forearm. Major Derek Castellanos had been watching her morning ritual for weeks now, initially with skepticism, then with growing respect. The other pilots called her obsessive, said she treated her aircraft like a religious shrine. But Castellanos had seen her combat record: 37 confirmed enemy kills, 0 aircraft losses, and a reputation for bringing everyone home no matter how badly the mission went sideways. That's when he saw it. Just above her wrist, barely visible beneath the fabric, was the edge of something that made his blood run cold. Not the typical military ink that adorned half the soldiers on base: eagles, skulls, unit patches, or girlfriends' names. This was different, older, more personal, and completely forbidden. The tattoo appeared to be in a script he didn't recognize, delicate characters that seemed to flow like water across her skin. But it wasn't the foreign writing that stopped him in his tracks. It was what surrounded it, a small, precise symbol that every intelligence officer in the military had been briefed to watch for. A symbol that belonged to a ghost unit that officially didn't exist. A unit that had been disbanded 3 years ago after a classified incident that left 12 operators dead and 1 missing. Raven noticed his stare and quickly pulled her sleeve down, but it was too late. Their eyes met across the flight line, and in that moment, Castellanos realized that Chief Warrant Officer Raven Nakamura, Blackbird to her squadron, might be the most dangerous person on the entire base. The question was, dangerous to whom? The Apache's rotors began their slow morning warm-up cycle, and with them, the careful silence that had protected one of the military's most closely guarded secrets was about to shatter forever. Raven Nakamura had been running from her past for 3 years, hiding in plain sight among the regular Army aviation units. She'd taken a voluntary demotion, surrendered her captain's bars, and buried her real service record so deep that even she sometimes forgot who she used to be. The woman who'd once led the most classified helicopter missions in military history had become just another warrant officer grinding through deployments, keeping her head down and her mouth shut. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially in the crucible of combat. Castellanos approached slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Chief Nakamura," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of authority and something else, curiosity that bordered on suspicion. Raven continued her inspection without looking up. "Morning, sir. Beautiful day for flying." Her voice was steady, professional, betraying nothing of the adrenaline now flooding her system. She'd been expecting this conversation for 3 years, rehearsing it in her mind during countless sleepless nights. "That's an interesting tattoo," Castellanos said, stopping just close enough to be heard over the Apache's increasingly loud rotor wash. "Where'd you get it done?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Raven's hands never stopped moving along the aircraft's surface, but her entire body tensed. This was the moment she dreaded, when her carefully constructed new identity would begin to crumble. "Bangkok," she lied smoothly. "Got drunk on, you know how it is." She finally looked at him, her dark eyes giving away nothing. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Castellanos nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't buying it. Bangkok, right. He paused, watching her reaction. Funny thing is, I've seen that script before, in classified briefings. Very classified briefings. Raven's hand froze on the Apache's armor plating. Around them, the base was coming alive with the morning shift change. Mechanics rolled out tool carts, other pilots began their own pre-flight routines, and the distant sound of reveille echoed across the compound. It was just another ordinary day in Afghanistan. Except nothing about this moment felt ordinary. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Major," Raven said carefully, "but I think you might be mistaken." "Ghost Unit Tango 77, Castellanos said quietly. "Operation Nightfall, 12 KIA 1 MIA. Ring any bells?" The words hit Raven like physical blows. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and suddenly she wasn't standing on a sun-baked tarmac in Afghanistan. She was back in the Hindu Kush Mountains, watching her entire team disappear in a ball of fire while she flew circles above, helpless to save them. When she opened her eyes, Castellanos was studying her face with the intensity of a man reading a classified document. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost its steadiness. The major stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Captain Raven Nakamura, call sign Blackbird, former commander of the 1st Special Operations Aviation Detachment, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, officially dead for the past 3 years." Raven felt the world tilt slightly. Her carefully constructed walls were crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Major Castellanos had done his homework. The previous night, after seeing that glimpse of tattoo, he'd spent hours digging through classified databases, following digital breadcrumbs that most officers didn't even know existed. What he'd found had kept him awake until dawn, staring at a computer screen that told an impossible story. According to official records, Captain Raven Nakamura had died 3 years ago in a classified operation gone wrong. Her helicopter had been shot down over enemy territory. Her body never recovered. She'd been posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for her actions during Operation Nightfall, where she'd single-handedly held off an entire Taliban battalion while evacuating wounded Special Operations soldiers. But the woman standing in front of him was very much alive. "The question," Castellanos continued, "is why a dead Medal of Honor recipient is serving as a chief warrant officer in my squadron, and why nobody thought to mention it." Raven straightened, and for just a moment Castellanos caught a glimpse of the officer she used to be. Her posture shifted subtly, her eyes hardened, and suddenly she didn't look like just another pilot going through the motions. She looked dangerous. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "staying dead is the only way to stay alive." The admission hung between them like a confession. Castellanos realized he was standing at the edge of something much larger than a simple case of mistaken identity. This was about classified operations, government cover-ups, and secrets that people killed to protect. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, "what the hell did you stumble into up there?" Raven looked past him toward the mountains that ringed the base, their peaks still shrouded in morning mist. Somewhere up there, in caves and valleys that didn't appear on any map, were the answers to his question. And somewhere up there were the ghosts of 12 good soldiers who died because she'd made the wrong choice at the worst possible moment. "Something that's about to catch up with all of us," she said. The sound of incoming helicopters interrupted them, a formation of Black Hawks approaching from the north, their rotors cutting through the morning air with military precision. But these weren't regular Army aircraft. Even from a distance, Castellanos could see the modifications, the extra antennas, the non-standard paint scheme that marked them as special operations birds. Raven saw them too, and her face went pale. "They found me," she whispered. The Black Hawks settled onto the tarmac in perfect formation, their engines winding down with synchronized precision. From the lead aircraft emerged a figure that made Raven's blood run cold. Colonel Marcus "Reaper" Davidson, her former commanding officer and the man who'd signed her death certificate 3 years ago. Davidson was exactly as she remembered him. Tall, lean, with gray eyes that seemed to cut through whatever they looked at. He wore the simple flight suit of a special operations pilot, but his bearing marked him as someone who commanded respect and obedience without question. He walked directly toward them, his gaze fixed on Raven with the intensity of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. "Hello, Blackbird," he said, his voice carrying across the morning air. "We need to talk." Raven stood frozen, trapped between her old life and her new one, knowing that the choice she made in the next few seconds would determine whether she lived to see another sunset. Around them, the base continued its morning routine, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the flight line. But Major Castellanos was beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The woman he thought he knew, quiet, competent, unremarkable Chief Warrant Officer Nakamura, was actually one of the military's most classified assets. And now she was being recalled to duty by people who officially didn't exist. Colonel Davidson stopped just close enough to be heard without shouting, but far enough away to maintain the illusion of a casual conversation. To any observer, it would look like a routine briefing between officers. Only the three of them knew they were negotiating the terms of a secret that could destabilize governments. 3 years, Davidson said, his voice carrying a mixture of reproach and something that might have been relief. 3 years of letting us think you were dead. Do you have any idea what that did to your team's families, to your squadron? Raven's jaw tightened. My team was already dead, sir. I just made it official. Your team died because they believed in their mission and their commander, Davidson shot back. You dishonored that sacrifice by running away. The accusation hit its mark. Raven flinched as if she'd been struck, her composure finally cracking. I didn't run away, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to protect what was left. Castellanos watched the exchange with growing fascination and dread. These weren't the words of people discussing routine military matters. This was personal, painful, and probably treasonous. Protect what exactly? Davidson demanded. The classified intel you extracted from that compound. The same intel that's been sitting in a safety deposit box in Dubai for 3 years, while American soldiers died for lack of actionable intelligence. Raven's face went white. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Davidson interrupted. I understand that you've been hiding while good soldiers paid the price for your cowardice. The words struck Raven like physical blows. She took a step back, her hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm holstered at her hip. It was a gesture born of years of training and paranoia, and it didn't go unnoticed. Easy, Blackbird, Davidson said, raising his hand slightly. We're all friends here. But his eyes had hardened, and Castellanos noticed that the other special operations soldiers had positioned themselves strategically around the flight line. They weren't taking any chances. What do you want? Raven asked. Davidson smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. The same thing I wanted 3 years ago. I want you to finish the mission. The mission that had killed 12 of the finest soldiers America had ever produced. The mission that had been classified so deeply that it didn't officially exist. The mission that had forced Raven to choose between saving her team and protecting a secret that could change the balance of power in the entire region. She'd chosen the secret. Her team had died for it. And now, 3 years later, that choice was coming back to haunt everyone. The intel you extracted, Davidson continued, it's more important now than it was then. The geopolitical situation has changed. What we thought was a regional threat has gone global. Raven glanced at Castellanos. suddenly aware that they were discussing classified information in front of a man who didn't have the security clearance to hear it. But Davidson seemed unconcerned with operational security protocols. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Davidson's smile widened. "Then you'll be arrested for desertion, treason, and theft of classified materials. Your new identity will disappear, and Chief Warrant Officer Nakamura will join Captain Nakamura in official death." It wasn't really a choice at all. The standoff stretched out across the morning air, three military officers locked in a conversation that could reshape American foreign policy. Around them, the routine business of the forward operating base continued, but Raven felt as if she were standing in the eye of a hurricane. Finally she nodded. "What's the mission?" Davidson's expression shifted from predatory satisfaction to professional focus. "There's a compound in the Wacken corridor. High-value target, maximum security, zero margin for error. The kind of mission that requires a pilot who can thread the needle at 140 knots in zero visibility." "The kind of mission that gets people killed," Raven said flatly. "The kind of mission that saves countries," Davidson corrected. "The intel you recovered 3 years ago led us to this target. Now we need you to help us take it down." Raven looked at the Apache helicopter behind her, then at the Special Operations Black Hawks, then at Major Castellanos, who was watching the entire exchange with the fascination of a man witnessing a car crash. "And if I succeed," she asked, "then maybe you can finally stop running from what happened to your team." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and threat. Raven had spent 3 years trying to forget Operation Nightfall, 3 years trying to convince herself that she'd made the right choice. Now she was being offered a chance at redemption, or a chance to repeat her mistakes on an even larger scale. "I'll need my own team," she said finally. Davidson shook his head. "You'll work with whoever we assign." "Then find another pilot." "There is no other pilot," Davidson said quietly. "You're the only person alive who's seen the interior of a similar compound. You're the only one who knows their security protocols, their defensive positions, their reaction times." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You're the only one who can get our people in and out alive." Raven closed her eyes, and once again she was back in the Hindu Kush, watching her team die while she flew circles overhead. The memory was as sharp and painful as ever, but now it carried a different weight. Not just guilt and regret, but responsibility. 12 soldiers had died so she could extract intelligence that might save thousands of lives. The question was whether she was brave enough, or foolish enough, to honor that sacrifice. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. "When do we leave?" Davidson checked his watch. "Wheels up in 6 hours. Your aircraft is being prepped as we speak." He gestured toward the Special Operations Black Hawks. Modified Apache longbow, upgraded avionics, enhanced armor, extended range fuel tanks. Raven followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. Sitting on a trailer behind the Black Hawks was an Apache helicopter unlike any she'd ever seen. It was painted in the flat black of Special Operations aircraft, but the modifications went far beyond cosmetic changes. The fuselage had been stretched to accommodate additional fuel, the stub wings extended to carry more ordnance, and the entire aircraft bristled with antennas and sensors that belonged on an intelligence-gathering platform rather than an attack helicopter. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "Jesus," she whispered, "what did you do to her?" "Everything necessary," Davidson replied. "This isn't going to be a standard close air support mission, Blackbird. This is going to be the most complex helicopter operation ever attempted." Raven walked slowly toward the modified Apache, her professional eye automatically cataloging the changes. The aircraft represented millions of dollars in research and development, hundreds of hours of engineering work, and technology that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. It was also, she realized, a flying coffin. The modifications made the helicopter heavier, more complex, and infinitely more likely to suffer catastrophic mechanical failure under combat conditions. Every additional system was another potential point of failure, every upgrade a compromise that made the aircraft less reliable. "How many test flights?" she asked. Davidson's pause was answer enough. "None," she said, not really asking. The mission timeline didn't allow for extensive testing. Raven laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you want me to fly an untested prototype helicopter into the most dangerous airspace in the world, against an enemy that's had 3 years to prepare for my return?" "That's about the size of it," Davidson admitted. Major Castellanos had been listening to the exchange with growing alarm. He was beginning to understand that he'd stumbled into something far beyond his experience or authority. These weren't normal military operations. This was the kind of black ops mission that created legends or body counts, with no middle ground. "Sir," he interrupted, addressing Davidson, "with respect, this sounds like a suicide mission." Davidson turned his cold, gray eyes on the major, and Castellanos felt like he was being evaluated as a potential threat. "Major, you're going to forget everything you've heard here today. You're going to file a report stating that Chief Warrant Officer Nakamura has been temporarily reassigned to special duties, and you're going to pray that you never see any of us again." The threat was politely phrased but unmistakably clear. Castellanos nodded quickly, suddenly understanding that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. But it was Raven who surprised them both. "He's coming with us," she said quietly. Both men turned to stare at her. "What?" Davidson said. "Major Castellanos is one of the finest pilots I've ever flown with," Raven continued. "If this mission is as dangerous as you're suggesting, I want someone I trust flying my wing." Davidson shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. He doesn't have the security clearance, the training, or the experience for this type of operation." "Then give him the clearance and the training," Raven said, "because I'm not flying this mission alone." The two officers stared at each other across the tarmac, and Castellanos realized he was witnessing a battle of wills between two of the most dangerous people he'd ever met. His fate, and possibly his life, hung in the balance. Finally, Davidson smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Congratulations, Major," he said. "You just volunteered for the most classified mission in American military history." Castellanos felt his world tilt on its axis. 6 hours ago, he'd been a routine squadron commander looking forward to a quiet deployment. Now, he was apparently part of a black ops mission that didn't officially exist, working with a pilot who was supposed to be dead. "Sir," he said weakly, "I'm not sure I'm qualified." "None of us are qualified for what we're about to do," Raven interrupted. "That's what makes it interesting." She was studying the modified Apache with the intensity of a mechanic examining a delicate piece of machinery. Her professional demeanor had returned, pushing aside the emotional turmoil of her confrontation with Davidson. This was the pilot who'd earned the Medal of Honor, the woman who could thread a helicopter through enemy fire with surgical precision. "I'll need 2 hours to familiarize myself with the modifications," she said. "Another hour for mission planning. That leaves 3 hours for Major Castellanos to receive whatever training you think he needs." Davidson nodded slowly. "The briefing room is being prepared. Your mission packet is classified top-secret special compartmented information. Once you read it, you'll understand why this mission is worth the risk." He paused, looking at both pilots with something that might have been sympathy. "And you'll understand why failure is not an option." The mission briefing took place in a windowless room deep inside the base command center, far from the routine bustle of normal military operations. The walls were lined with maps, satellite photos, and intelligence reports that painted a picture of a region balanced on the knife's edge between stability and chaos. Raven and Castellanos sat at a metal table, reviewing documents that were stamped with security classifications they'd never seen before. The intelligence was staggering in its scope and terrifying in its implications. "The target," Davidson began, pointing to a satellite photograph of a compound nestled in a valley high in the Wakhan corridor, "is a facility that officially doesn't exist. According to Pakistani and Afghan authorities, this valley is uninhabited. According to our intelligence sources, it houses one of the most sophisticated terrorist networks in the world." The compound looked innocuous enough from space, a cluster of buildings surrounded by high walls, with what appeared to be agricultural fields and livestock pens. It could have been any of thousands of similar structures scattered across the region. But Raven knew better. She'd seen compounds like this before, places where appearance and reality diverged in deadly ways. "Surface-to-air missiles?" she asked. "Assume full coverage," Davidson replied. "Russian SA-7s at minimum, possibly newer systems. The intelligence suggests they have early warning radar and coordinated defensive positions." Castellanos studied the topographical maps, tracing potential approach routes with his finger. "The valley walls are steep," he observed. "Limited maneuvering room. If we take fire, there's nowhere to run." "Which is why the approach will be made at night, in radio silence, using terrain-following flight paths that will keep you below radar coverage until the final assault." Davidson activated a wall-mounted display screen that showed a three-dimensional rendering of the target area. The detail was extraordinary. Every building, every tree, every potential defensive position had been mapped and cataloged. "The primary target is this building," he continued, highlighting a structure in the center of the compound. "Intelligence indicates it houses a command center and communications facility. Secondary targets are the ammunition storage and vehicle maintenance areas." Raven leaned forward, studying the building layouts with professional interest. "What's the objective? Capture or destroy?" "Both," Davidson said. "Your mission is to insert a special operations team into the compound, provide close air support during their operation, and extract them along with any intelligence materials they recover." It sounded straightforward enough, but Raven had participated in enough classified missions to know that the simple ones were usually the most dangerous. "What's special about this particular terrorist cell?" she asked. "Why risk this level of exposure for one compound?" Davidson exchanged glances with another officer who'd been silently observing the briefing. The man nodded slightly, giving permission for information that was apparently classified even beyond their current level. "3 weeks ago," Davidson said quietly, "our intelligence assets intercepted communications suggesting this cell has acquired weapons-grade nuclear materials." The words fell into the briefing room like stones into still water. Raven felt her blood turn to ice, understanding immediately why this mission was worth any risk. "How much material?" Castellanos asked. "Enough to build a dirty bomb capable of rendering several city blocks uninhabitable for decades." The implications were staggering. A terrorist organization with access to radioactive materials could hold any major city hostage, could create panic and disruption far beyond the physical damage of any conventional attack. "And you think the materials are at this compound?" Raven asked. "We think the command structure that controls them is there," Davidson corrected. "The materials themselves could be anywhere, New York, London, Paris, but the people who decide when and where to use them are in that valley." Raven closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just another combat mission. This was potentially a matter of national survival. "Rules of engagement?" she asked. "There are no rules," Davidson replied. "This mission is authorized under special presidential directive. You have carte blanche to do whatever is necessary to ensure mission success. Translation: they were being given permission to start a small war if that's what it took to stop a nuclear terrorist attack. The briefing continued for another hour, covering every aspect of the mission from weather conditions to extraction procedures. The plan was ambitious, complex, and fraught with opportunities for catastrophic failure. It was exactly the kind of operation that Raven had spent 3 years trying to forget. But it was also exactly the kind of mission that justified every risk they were taking. When the briefing ended, Raven found herself alone with Castellanos in the corridor outside the briefing room. The major looked shaken, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were being asked to do. "Are you okay?" she asked. Castellanos laughed, but there was no humor in it. 12 hours ago, my biggest worry was a routine supply flight to Kabul. Now I'm part of a mission to prevent nuclear terrorism. It's a lot to process, Raven agreed. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you carry this kind of weight?" Raven was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. "You remember that people are counting on you," she said finally. "People who don't even know your name, who will never know what you did for them. But they're counting on you anyway." She paused, looking toward the flight line where the modified Apache waited. "And you remember the people who didn't make it home. You honor their sacrifice by making sure their deaths meant something." Castellanos nodded slowly, beginning to understand the burden that came with this level of responsibility. "Will we make it back?" he asked. Raven looked at him with eyes that had seen too much combat, too much loss, too much sacrifice. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but we're going to try like hell." The modified Apache helicopter crouched on the tarmac like a mechanical predator, its flat black paint absorbing the afternoon sunlight. Raven walked slowly around the aircraft, her trained eye cataloging every modification, every potential weakness, every system that could fail at the worst possible moment. The engineers had done remarkable work. The Apache's combat systems had been enhanced beyond anything she'd ever seen: upgraded targeting systems, improved defensive measures, and weapons loadouts that pushed the boundaries of what the airframe could carry. But every upgrade came with a cost in complexity and reliability. "She's beautiful," Castellanos said, joining her inspection tour. "She's dangerous," Raven corrected. "All those modifications make her unpredictable. We won't know how she handles until we're airborne." The pre-flight inspection took longer than usual, partly because of the unfamiliar systems, and partly because Raven's paranoia had been honed by years of flying missions where mechanical failure meant death. Every bolt was checked twice, every connection tested, every warning light verified. The special operations soldiers who would be their passengers arrived as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. They were a mixed unit: Americans, British, and others whose nationalities were deliberately obscured. But their equipment and bearing marked them as elite operators, the kind of soldiers who specialized in impossible missions. Their commander was a compact man with steady eyes and the calloused hands of someone who'd spent years handling weapons. He introduced himself simply as Major Brooks and offered no other details about his background. "How much do you know about the target?" Raven asked him during their final coordination meeting. "Everything that matters," Brooks replied. "Guard rotations, defensive positions, structural weaknesses. We've been planning this for 6 months." "6 months?" Castellanos looked surprised. "I thought this was a rush job." Brooks and Raven exchanged glances. "The mission is a rush job," Brooks said carefully. "The planning started the day we lost contact with our assets inside the compound." The revelation hung in the air like a confession. They weren't just flying blind into enemy territory. They were flying into a situation where American intelligence operatives had already been compromised. "How many people did we lose?" Raven asked quietly. "3 confirmed," Brooks replied. 2 more unaccounted for. 5 American soldiers were dead or captured, and now they were being asked to fly into the same trap. It was exactly the kind of escalating disaster that had destroyed Raven's previous team. But this time, she told herself, things would be different. This time she would bring everyone home. The final mission briefing took place on the flight line as darkness settled over the base. The team gathered around a portable table lit by red-filtered flashlights that would preserve their night vision. Charts and photographs were spread across the surface, showing approach routes, target layouts, and contingency plans for when everything went wrong. Time on target is 300 hours, Davidson announced. The approach will be made from the south, using the river valley to mask our radar signature. Radio silence until we reach the initial point. Raven studied the approach route one more time, committing every landmark to memory. The flight path would take them through some of the most treacherous terrain in Afghanistan, following ridgelines and river valleys that offered concealment but little room for error. "What's our extraction plan if the primary landing zone is compromised?" she asked. Davidson pointed to a spot several kilometers from the compound. "Secondary LZ here, tertiary here. If all else fails, you extract to Pakistan and we'll sort out the diplomatic mess later." It wasn't much of a contingency plan, but it was better than nothing. In special operations, better than nothing was often the best you could hope for. "Any questions?" Davidson asked. The team was silent, each member lost in their own thoughts and preparations. They were as ready as they would ever be for a mission that would either save thousands of lives or add their names to a classified casualty report. "Mount up," Davidson ordered. Raven climbed into the Apache's cockpit, her movements automatic after thousands of hours in similar aircraft. But this helicopter was different, more complex, more capable, and infinitely more dangerous. The instrument panel glowed with displays she'd never seen before, showing information about systems that hadn't existed when she'd learned to fly. Castellanos settled into the front seat, running through his own checklist. As the co-pilot and gunner, he would be responsible for the Apache's weapons systems and navigation, freeing Raven to concentrate on flying. "Pre-flight complete," he reported over the intercom. "Roger," Raven replied, starting engines. The Apache's twin turbines spooled up with a rising whine that built to a thunderous roar. Around them, the special operations soldiers made their final preparations, checking weapons and equipment one last time. As the rotor blades began their slow rotation, building speed and lift, Raven felt the familiar mixture of fear and exhilaration that came with dangerous missions. This was what she'd been trained for, what she'd spent her entire career preparing to do. But as the helicopter lifted off the tarmac and turned toward the mountains, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was flying toward a destiny that had been 3 years in the making. The mission that had killed her previous team was finally reaching its conclusion. The Apache climbed steadily into the Afghan night, its modified engines pushing the aircraft to altitudes that would have been impossible for a standard helicopter. Below them, the landscape gradually transformed from the flat desert around the base to the rugged mountains that formed the spine of Central Asia. Raven flew by instruments alone, trusting the aircraft's advanced navigation systems to guide them through valleys and around peaks that were invisible in the darkness. The helicopter's night vision systems painted the world in ghostly green images, revealing a landscape that was beautiful and deadly in equal measure. "Checkpoint Alpha in 2 minutes," Castellanos reported quietly over the intercom. They were following a precise flight path that had been calculated to avoid known radar installations and potential observation posts. Every turn, every altitude change, every course correction had been planned to minimize their exposure to enemy detection. But plans, Raven knew, rarely survived contact with reality. "Contact," Castellanos suddenly announced. Aircraft bearing 270 range approximately 15 miles. Raven's blood turned to ice. They were supposed to be alone in this airspace, flying a route that avoided all known air traffic. Identify, she ordered. Castellanos worked frantically with the Apache's electronic warfare systems, trying to determine the type and intent of the approaching aircraft. The sensors painted a picture of a single helicopter flying a parallel course, close enough to be a threat but far enough away to maintain plausible deniability. Single aircraft appears to be a Mi-17 transport helicopter. No radar lock, no hostile actions indicated. But Raven wasn't taking any chances. The appearance of any aircraft in this area was suspicious, and the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "Take us down to nap of the earth," she ordered, pushing the Apache into a steep descent that brought them within 50 feet of the valley floor. Flying this low, at night, in unfamiliar terrain was incredibly dangerous. The modified Apache was heavier than a standard aircraft, less maneuverable, and more prone to blade strikes against unseen obstacles. But it also made them nearly invisible to radar and difficult to spot visually. "Lost contact with the unknown aircraft," Castellanos reported. "Either he's gone to ground like us, or he's moved out of sensor range." Raven held the Apache in its dangerous low-altitude flight profile for another 10 minutes, following the twisting course of a river that would lead them deeper into the mountains. The helicopter's downwash churned the water into froth, and several times she had to pull up sharply to avoid power lines or radio towers that appeared suddenly in their path. "This is insane," Castellanos muttered. "This is necessary," Raven corrected, but she knew he was right. They were pushing the boundaries of safe flight operations, taking risks that would be unacceptable under normal circumstances. But nothing about this mission was normal. "Checkpoint Bravo coming up," Castellanos announced. "Turn to heading 045 degrees." Raven banked the Apache into a climbing turn that took them over a ridge and into the next valley. According to their charts, this area was completely uninhabited, a wilderness of rock and ice where few humans had ever set foot, which made the cluster of lights visible ahead of them all the more alarming. "Jesus Christ," Castellanos whispered. Below them spread a cross,